I should have realized something was wrong when Robert started suggesting we modernize our guest house, the same guest house he'd complained about maintaining for years. "Just a small renovation," he said, "for when your mother visits." My mother, who lives 20 minutes away and has never once stayed overnight. That should have been my first clue. But when you've been married for 15 years to someone you trust completely, you don't immediately jump to, "He's preparing a love nest for his mistress." At least I didn't. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Morgan. Until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. A thriving interior design business I'd built from scratch, a gorgeous colonial house in the suburbs of Philadelphia, 3 investment properties generating substantial passive income, and a husband who I believed supported me through it all. Robert and I met at a charity gala 12 years ago. He was charismatic, ambitious, and seemed genuinely impressed by my independence. As a financial advisor with a growing client list, he complemented my creative tendencies with practical financial wisdom. Or so I thought. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Robert had left early for what he called a breakfast client meeting. I was reviewing design plans for a new project when a notification pinged on my phone, a charge for $3,200 at Jensen's Fine Furniture. I frowned, trying to remember if Robert had mentioned purchasing anything. We maintained separate personal accounts but shared notifications for our joint card, which was primarily used for household expenses and investments. I texted him casually, "What's the Jensen's purchase for?" His response came quickly. Too quickly. "Office is upgrading conference room, expensing it tomorrow." I might have accepted that explanation if I hadn't personally designed his office. 3 years ago, with custom furniture from Westlake's, Jensen's main competitor. And if his firm didn't have strict procurement procedures requiring corporate approval before purchases. Still, I didn't immediately assume the worst. Maybe policies had changed. Maybe he was surprising me with something. I decided to finish my work and head home early to catch up on some reading. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar silver Audi parked near our guest house. The guest house that had been under renovation for the past month. Renovations that Robert had insisted on managing himself, uncharacteristically shutting down my offers to provide design input. Through the large windows of the guest house, I caught a glimpse of Robert helping a woman arrange what looked suspiciously like the Jensen's mohair sectional I'd admired last season, but deemed too extravagant for our budget. The woman, younger, with the kind of effortless beauty that takes considerable effort, laughed at something Robert said, touching his arm with familiar ease. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I backed my car out silently and drove to the coffee shop, downtown where my friend Melissa worked as the manager. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Melissa said as I collapsed into a chair in the corner. "I think Robert's having an affair," I replied, the words sounding strange as they left my mouth. "And I think he's moving her into our guest house." Melissa's expression darkened. "Tell me everything." I explained what I'd seen, the furniture charge, the renovations. As I spoke, more inconsistencies surfaced in my mind. Robert's recent overnight conferences, the password changes on our shared cloud storage, his insistence that I not disturb him in his home office. "What are you going to do?" Melissa asked, after I finished. I took a deep breath. "I'm not confronting him. Not yet." "Why not? I'd be throwing his clothes on the lawn and changing the locks." I shook my head. "Because I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with first." Something inside me, perhaps the business negotiator I'd become over years of dealing with difficult clients, knew that emotional confrontation would only give Robert time to create more convincing lies. If he was betraying me personally, what else might he be doing? Our finances were intertwined in ways that suddenly felt dangerous. "I need information," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Then I need a plan. I returned home after Robert texted that he was heading to a last-minute client dinner. The guest house lights were off. I entered our main house, making a show of arriving home normally in case there were now eyes watching. In our home office, I logged into our joint accounts, scanning for other unexpected charges. There they were, a trail of restaurants I'd never been to, weekend hotel charges in the city when Robert had claimed to be visiting his brother in Boston, and several transfers to an account I didn't recognize. I took photos of everything with my phone, careful not to disrupt any browser history. Then I noticed a business card that had fallen behind the desk. Natalie Chapman, Investment Relations, with a company I'd never heard of and a phone number with our area code. As I held that small piece of cardstock, something shifted inside me. The shock and hurt began to crystallize into something colder and more focused. Robert hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he was potentially compromising everything we'd built together. I slept in the guest bedroom that night, telling Robert via text that I had a migraine and needed complete darkness and silence. In reality, I lay awake making mental notes, forming the outline of what I would need to do next. By morning, one thing was clear. I wouldn't be a victim in this story. I would be the architect of my own justice. Part 2. The Discovery. Over the next week, I became an investigator of my own life. I maintained an outward appearance of normalcy, smiling at Robert over breakfast, asking about his day, even kissing him goodbye, while systematically documenting everything. My first ally was Melissa, who worked her coffee shop connections to confirm that Robert and a young blonde woman had been regular afternoon visitors for months. "They don't hide it," her barista told her. "Everyone assumes they're together." My second ally came unexpectedly. David Chen, our family attorney who had helped us set up our property investments, called about renewing some paperwork. Something in my voice must have alerted him. "Rebecca, is everything all right?" he asked after I'd given short replies to his questions. I hesitated only briefly. "I think Robert may be planning something I should be concerned about, financially speaking." David's response was measured. "I see. Perhaps we should meet in person to review your current arrangements." The following day, in David's downtown office, I laid out what I knew so far. The mysterious furniture, the unknown woman, the financial discrepancies. David listened without judgment, occasionally making notes. "Your investment properties," he said finally. "They were purchased primarily with your inheritance and business profits, correct?" I nodded. "After my parents died 5 years ago, I'd used my inheritance to buy our first rental property. The success of my design business had funded the second and third. Robert had contributed some funds and helped manage the investments, but they were predominantly built on my capital." "But they're in both our names," I added. "We set them up as jointly owned." David leaned forward. "Based on what you're describing, I'm concerned Robert may be planning financial maneuvers that aren't in your best interest. I recommend we conduct a complete audit of your financial situation immediately." Over the next 2 days, with David's guidance, I discovered the extent of Robert's betrayal. He had been systematically transferring small amounts from our joint business account to a separate LLC I knew nothing about. The transfers were just small enough to not trigger my attention. $500 here, $750 there. But over 2 years, they added up to nearly $80,000. My third ally appeared when I followed Robert one evening, watching from a discreet distance as he met a man at an upscale restaurant. I took photos, then sent them to Melissa, who forwarded them to her cousin, who worked at a competing financial firm. "That's James Wilson," her cousin texted back. "Senior partner at Crescent Investments. They're known for helping clients move assets offshore, not always legally." The most disturbing discovery came when I hired Lisa Patel, a private investigator. David recommended. Within 3 days, she had identified the mystery woman as Natalie Chapman, 29, a former client of Robert's who now worked at an investment firm with connections to Crescent Investments. They've been seeing each other for approximately 7 months, Lisa reported, showing me surveillance photos of them together at various locations. And there's something else you should know. She handed me a document showing a rental agreement for our guest house, not in my name or Robert's, but in the name of an LLC that matched the one receiving funds from our joint account. He's been planning this for months, Lisa explained gently, creating a separate business entity, establishing it as the technical owner of the guest house through a sublease arrangement, and building a paper trail that could potentially claim the guest house as separate business property in case of divorce. I felt physically ill, not just because of the affair, which hurt deeply, but because of the calculated nature of the betrayal. Robert wasn't just cheating, he was constructing an elaborate financial escape route. There's more, David said during our next meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We found evidence that Robert has been leveraging your jointly owned properties as collateral for business loans without your knowledge. He's used document signing software to duplicate your signature. Is that legal? I asked, my voice tight. No, David replied flatly. It's fraud. That evening, I sat alone in my car outside our house, the house I had decorated with such care, the house that now felt like an elaborate stage set. Through the windows, I could see Robert moving around the kitchen, probably preparing dinner, acting as if everything was normal. In the guest house, lights glowed warmly, and I caught a glimpse of Natalie moving past a window. The pain was still there, a constant ache beneath my ribs, but now it was accompanied by something else, a cold, clear determination. Robert had underestimated me in the most fundamental way possible. He thought I was a supporting character in his life story. It was time to show him I was writing my own. Part 3. The planning. I needed a strategy that would protect what was rightfully mine, while ensuring Robert faced consequences for his actions. Simple divorce wouldn't be enough, not when he had already begun manipulating our finances and forging documents. This required precision and timing. The first step was securing my financial position without alerting Robert. David helped me establish a separate bank account under my business name, where I began transferring my personal income. We were careful to maintain normal patterns in our joint accounts, so Robert wouldn't suspect anything. What about the properties? I asked David during one of our strategy sessions. If he's using them as collateral without my knowledge, they're at risk. That's our priority, David agreed. We need to establish clear documentation of the initial investment sources and secure the properties before he can take any further action. With David's guidance, I gathered comprehensive documentation proving my inheritance had funded the initial property purchases. We also compiled evidence of the forged signatures and unauthorized loan applications. My business partner, Jessica, became another crucial ally. When I finally told her what was happening, her practical approach helped ground me. Use the business structure to your advantage, she advised. The firm can legally purchase your ownership stake in the properties, placing them under corporate protection temporarily. This created a legitimate business transaction that would be difficult for Robert to challenge. We structured it as a standard asset protection strategy that many of our clients used. Nothing that would immediately signal my true intentions. Lisa, the private investigator, continued monitoring Robert's activities, providing regular updates on his meetings and movements. Through her surveillance, we discovered he was planning to meet with attorneys specializing in asset protection the following week. He's accelerating his timeline, Lisa warned. Something's triggered him to move faster. That something became clear when I checked our mail and found a letter from a bank I didn't recognize, congratulating us on our pre-approval for a home equity line of credit against our primary residence. Robert was preparing to extract as much value as possible from our assets. The most delicate part of my plan involved Natalie. While she was clearly participating in the affair, I wasn't convinced she understood the full extent of Robert's financial manipulations. Through Lisa's investigation, we learned that Natalie had previously been involved with another married financial advisor who had left her abruptly after promising to leave his wife. She might not know she's being used as part of a larger scheme, Lisa suggested. Some of her conversations with friends indicate she genuinely believes Robert is planning to divorce you and start a new life with her. I considered this information carefully. Natalie wasn't innocent, but she might be another piece in Robert's manipulations rather than an equal architect. This presented a potential strategic opening. Working with David, I developed a comprehensive action plan with clear phases. Phase 1 would secure my financial assets and document the fraud. Phase 2 would involve strategic confrontation and legal action. Phase 3 would recover what belonged to me and establish my independent future. I reviewed the plan with my small circle of trusted advisors, refining details and preparing for contingencies. Robert was a financial professional with connections and resources, but he had one critical weakness: his own arrogance. He believed I was too trusting and financially naive to catch on before he'd completed his exit strategy. Meanwhile, I maintained my performance of normalcy at home. I continued designing, meeting clients, and playing the role of supportive wife. I even suggested we have dinner at Roberto's, Robert's favorite restaurant, where I listened attentively as he explained why we should consider diversifying our property investments in the coming months. His thinly veiled way of preparing me for the disappearance of our assets. "You're right," I told him, smiling. "We should definitely explore our options." The double meaning gave me a small, cold satisfaction. One evening, as we prepared for bed, Robert received a text that made him frown. He quickly excused himself to make a call in his office. Using a technique Lisa had taught me, I positioned myself near the air vent where I could hear his conversation. "We need to move faster," he was saying tensely. "The Matthews property needs to be transferred before the end of the month." "Yes, I know it's ahead of schedule, but I'm concerned about potential complications. She doesn't suspect anything, but I'd rather secure everything now." The Matthews property was our largest investment, a small apartment building generating the most substantial income. His timeline was accelerating, which meant mine needed to as well. The next morning, I called David. "We need to implement Phase 1 immediately." 48 hours later, everything was in place. My inheritance money had been legally documented as the primary funding source for our properties. My business had established a legitimate claim to my ownership shares. Financial forensic experts had documented the forgery and fraud evidence. Most importantly, I had secured legal protection for all assets directly connected to my inheritance and business. Now I just needed the right moment to act. It came sooner than expected. Robert announced he needed to attend a 3-day conference in Chicago, a conference I knew didn't exist, thanks to Lisa's intelligence. He would be meeting with representatives from an offshore investment firm. "This is perfect timing," David said when I informed him. "We can file the emergency injunction while he's away, securing the properties before he can take any further action." As I helped Robert pack for his conference, I felt a strange sense of calm. For months, I had lived with the pain of betrayal and the anxiety of uncertainty. Now, with a clear path forward, I found my focus sharpening. "I'm so grateful for your support," Robert said as he kissed me goodbye, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I know these work trips are hard on us." I smiled, thinking of the documents waiting in David's office, ready to be filed the moment Robert's plane took off. "Don't worry," I told him. "I understand exactly how important this trip is." And I did, just not in the way he thought. Part 4. The action. Robert's flight to Chicago departed at 10:15 a.m. By 10:30, I was in David's office signing the final paperwork for our legal action. "Once these are filed, there's no turning back," David warned me. "Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to proceed?" I looked at the stack of documents representing months of investigation and planning. Each page documented a different aspect of Robert's betrayal: financial records showing the diverted funds, evidence of forged signatures, unauthorized loans against our properties, the fraudulent LLC arrangement for the guest house. "I'm certain," I replied, signing my name with steady hands. By noon, our emergency petition was filed with the court, freezing all joint assets and specifically prohibiting any transfer or encumbrance of the 3 investment properties. David had leveraged his connections to get an immediate hearing with Judge Caroline Foster, known for her no-nonsense approach to financial fraud cases. "Ms. Morgan has provided substantial evidence of ongoing financial fraud," David explained to the judge, methodically presenting our documentation. "We're seeking immediate protection of these assets pending full investigation." Judge Foster reviewed our evidence with sharp eyes. "This appears to meet the standard for emergency intervention," she stated. "I'm issuing a temporary freeze on all specified assets and scheduling a full hearing for next week." She turned her stern gaze to me. "Ms. Morgan, are you prepared for the consequences of these allegations? Financial fraud charges are serious matters." "I understand, Your Honor," I responded. "I didn't take this action lightly." The judge nodded once, then signed the order. Within hours, notifications would be sent to all financial institutions connected to our assets, effectively locking everything in place until the court could review the full case. My next stop was the police department, where I filed a formal report about the forgery and fraud with Detective Sarah Martinez. Lisa accompanied me, providing her professional assessment of the evidence. "We see this pattern frequently," Detective Martinez noted as she documented my statement. "One spouse using professional knowledge to systematically defraud the other. The forgery alone is a felony offense." While legal proceedings were now in motion, I still had one more critical step in my plan: confronting Natalie. Not out of jealousy or revenge, but as a strategic move to disrupt Robert's narrative before he could spin it to his advantage. Lisa had confirmed that Natalie would be at the guest house alone that afternoon. Robert's conference schedule meant he wouldn't be in contact with her until evening. I walked across our property to the guest house with purpose, knowing the next few minutes would significantly impact how the situation unfolded. I knocked firmly on the door. When Natalie answered, her expression shifted from casual welcome to shock as she recognized me. She was younger in person, probably early 30s, dressed in expensive loungewear that suggested comfortable domesticity. "Mrs. Morgan," she stammered, her hand clutching the doorframe. May I come in?" I asked calmly. "I think we should talk." Inside, the guest house had been completely transformed from the rustic space I remembered into a sleek, modern apartment. The Jensen's furniture complemented new artwork and high-end appliances. My design sensibilities noted that everything was new. This wasn't a gradual accumulation, but a deliberate recent setup. "I know who you are," I said once we were seated. "I know about your relationship with my husband, but I don't think you know everything about the situation you're in." Natalie's face flushed. "Robert told me you have an understanding, that your marriage is essentially over, just waiting for the right time to make it official." I smiled, without humor. "Is that what he told you when he moved you into a guest house that he doesn't legally own? When he used forged documents to secure loans against properties that aren't his to leverage?" Her expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" For the next 20 minutes, I methodically laid out what we had discovered: the fraudulent LLC that technically owned her current residence, the financial schemes Robert had been orchestrating, and the legal actions now in progress. "As of this morning, all joint assets are frozen by court order," I explained. "The properties Robert promised would fund your future together are now under investigation for fraud, and the offshore accounts he's been establishing are being flagged by financial crimes units." Natalie's face had gone pale. "I don't understand." He said the guest house was his investment property, that everything was above board. "Did he also tell you this is a pattern for him?" I asked, showing her the files Lisa had compiled. Before me, there was Stephanie Winters. Before her, Jennifer Lee. Both professional women with significant assets that mysteriously diminished during their relationships with Robert. I wasn't being entirely truthful. We had found evidence of only one previous relationship with similar patterns. But the bluff worked. Natalie's expression collapsed into uncertainty. "He's meeting with Crescent Investments right now, isn't he?" I continued. "Not at a conference in Chicago. They're finalizing arrangements to move assets offshore before what he's planned for. Next week." Her eyes widened. "How did you—" "Because I've spent months investigating every aspect of his operations," I replied. "And now I'm giving you a choice. You can continue with whatever he's promised you, understanding that it's built on fraud and will likely end with criminal charges. Or you can provide a statement to Detective Martinez about what you know." I stood to leave, placing my card on her coffee table. "I don't blame you for believing him, Natalie. He's very convincing. But I do think you should ask yourself what happens when he no longer needs you for this particular part of his plan." As I walked back to the main house, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Judge has expedited the hearing. Full asset freeze confirmed. Banks implementing now." Phase 1 was complete. The properties and assets were secured. Now we waited for Robert's reaction when he discovered his carefully constructed plans had collapsed. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, my phone exploded with notifications. First, text messages from Robert that quickly escalated from casual check-ins to urgent demands that I call him immediately. Then emails, each more frantic than the last. Finally, a call from an unknown number. I answered on speakerphone, with Lisa recording for our records. "What have you done?" Robert's voice was barely controlled fury. "Protected what's mine," I replied calmly, "which became necessary when you decided to steal it." "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted, his tone shifting to the reasonable voice he used with difficult clients. "I can explain everything if you just reverse these ridiculous legal actions." "Explain the forged signatures, the fraudulent LLC, the offshore accounts? Or perhaps you'd like to explain Natalie and the guest house?" Silence stretched for several seconds. "You've made a serious mistake," he finally said, his voice cold. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually, Robert, you're the one who miscalculated. Everything is documented. The forgery, the fraud, the unauthorized loans, the police have been very interested in the pattern." Another pause. "We could have resolved this privately. Now you've forced a public fight that will damage us both." "No," I corrected him. "I've ensured justice for what you tried to take from me. The properties that my inheritance paid for are protected. The money you diverted has been identified. And your partner at the guest house is currently giving a statement to Detective Martinez." That last part wasn't confirmed yet, but based on Natalie's reaction, I suspected she would cooperate rather than go down with Robert's sinking ship. "This isn't over," he threatened. "You're right about that," I agreed. "The criminal investigation is just beginning." Part 5. The Transformation. The following weeks unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. Each legal motion, financial discovery, and procedural hearing building toward resolution. Robert fought back, of course. He hired an aggressive attorney who filed counter motions claiming I had manipulated financial records to frame him. He attempted to access our frozen accounts through secondary means. He even tried to convince mutual friends that I had fabricated the entire situation during a mental health crisis. But evidence doesn't lie. The forensic financial audit revealed the full extent of his schemes. Not just the money diverted from our accounts, but similar patterns with previous relationships. The forged documents were confirmed by handwriting experts. And most damaging of all, Natalie did indeed provide a detailed statement to the police, describing how Robert had instructed her to establish residence in the guest house as part of a property investment strategy. The criminal charges came first: forgery, fraud, attempted theft, and misappropriation of funds. The civil case followed, resulting in the complete dissolution of our marriage, with all 3 investment properties returned fully to my ownership. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained my composure, focusing on rebuilding rather than revenge. My business continued to thrive, partially because I channeled my energy into creative work rather than allowing myself to be consumed by bitterness. 6 months after that first glimpse of Natalie in our guest house, I stood in the same space, now completely redesigned as my new home office. The main house had been sold, its memories too tainted to preserve. Instead, I had relocated to a downtown loft and converted the guest house into a satellite office for client meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me. The space Robert had prepared for his exit strategy had become the headquarters for my new beginning. "The last of the paperwork is complete," David informed me during our final official meeting. "Robert's sentencing is next week, but regardless of the outcome, your assets are secured and legally protected." "And the other women?" I asked, referring to the previous victims we had identified during our investigation. "The prosecutor is working with them on potential restitution, though recovery will be limited. Unfortunately, they didn't have your resources or evidence." That conversation sparked something unexpected, a new direction for both my business and personal mission. In the months that followed, I established the Morgan Foundation for Financial Literacy, focusing specifically on helping women protect themselves from financial exploitation. Using my experience and network, I created workshops, resources, and support systems for women navigating complex financial situations. Jessica and I expanded our design firm to include a consulting division that specialized in helping women establish financial independence through property investment. The guest house became the first of what would eventually be a network of resource centers where women could access legal advice, financial planning, and support services. My story could have ended with the legal victory, the satisfaction of seeing Robert face consequences for his actions and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. But true transformation comes not just from surviving betrayal, but from creating meaning from the experience. 1 year after discovering Robert's betrayal, I stood before a room of women at our foundation's first major conference. Some were emerging from similar situations, others were building their financial knowledge proactively. All were taking control of their futures. "When someone betrays you," I told them, "they reveal themselves, not you. My husband thought he could exploit my trust because he mistook it for weakness. He didn't realize that the same determination and intelligence that built my business would be turned toward protecting it." I looked around at the community we were building, professional women supporting each other, sharing knowledge, and creating safeguards against exploitation. The properties I fought to protect were valuable not just financially, but as symbols of what I had built through my own efforts. By trying to take them, my husband inadvertently pushed me to create something even more meaningful: this foundation and the community we're building together. As applause filled the room, I felt the final pieces of my healing lock into place. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. Betrayal leaves scars that time can fade but never completely erase. But it no longer defined me. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, thinking it was the beginning of his new life at my expense. Instead, it became the catalyst for my transformation and the foundation for helping other women write their own stories of resilience. In the end, what Robert never understood was that true power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from creating something meaningful that extends beyond yourself. And that was something he could never take away from me. The Morgan Foundation quickly became more than just a passion project. It became my purpose. What began as quarterly workshops in the renovated guest house expanded into a comprehensive support network with national reach. The irony wasn't lost on me that the space Robert had intended for deception had transformed into a beacon of empowerment and transparency. 2 years after Robert's sentencing, he received 18 months in a minimum security facility plus 5 years of probation, I found myself reviewing applications for our foundation's scholarship program. We provided financial support to women returning to school after relationship dissolution, particularly those who had experienced financial abuse. Each application told a story of resilience that resonated with my own journey. "You've got visitors," called Jessica, who had become the foundation's co-director while maintaining our thriving design business. We had successfully separated our professional operations from my personal legal battles, ensuring our clients and employees remained insulated from the fallout of Robert's crimes. I looked up to see Detective Sarah Martinez accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. The woman appeared to be in her mid-40s, professionally dressed but with the slightly haunted expression I'd come to recognize in those who had experienced profound betrayal. "Ms. Morgan," Detective Martinez began after introductions, "this is Catherine Dowell. She's recently filed charges against her former financial advisor for fraud and identity theft. When I recognized the pattern, I thought of you immediately." Catherine clutched her handbag tightly as she explained her situation. Her financial advisor, Michael Reeves, had gradually gained her trust after her husband's death, eventually convincing her to grant him limited power of attorney to streamline her investment management. Over 2 years, he had systematically siphoned nearly $300,000 from her accounts. "He created accounts I knew nothing about," Catherine explained, her voice steadying as she spoke. "Used my personal information to secure credit lines. When I finally noticed discrepancies and questioned him, he claimed it was a temporary strategy to maximize returns." The familiar pattern sent a chill through me. Let me guess, he's well-respected, charming, always has a plausible explanation for everything. Catherine nodded. "Everyone thinks I'm overreacting. His firm is conducting an internal review, but they're treating it like an accounting error rather than theft." I exchanged glances with Detective Martinez, whose slight nod confirmed my suspicion. "Have you verified whether there are other victims?" "That's partly why I'm here," Martinez replied. "We've identified 3 other clients with similar complaints, but the pattern suggests there could be more. Your foundation's resource network might help us connect with others." By evening, we had assembled a small team including David, Lisa, and 2 financial forensic specialists who volunteered with our foundation. The parallels to Robert's operations were striking: the gradual escalation, the technical compliance with financial regulations while violating client trust, the careful selection of victims. "He's targeting widows with substantial assets," noted one of our specialists, reviewing the preliminary data. "Women who have inherited wealth but perhaps lack confidence in managing it independently." I felt that familiar cold determination settle over me. Then we build a case that's impossible to dismiss as accounting errors. Over the next 3 months, our foundation's resources became instrumental in building a comprehensive case against Michael Reeves. We established a dedicated hotline for potential victims, created a secure database to identify patterns across separated cases, and provided financial and emotional support to those coming forward. The investigation expanded beyond what Detective Martinez had initially anticipated. What began as 4 potential victims grew to 11 confirmed cases spanning 5 years. The total financial impact exceeded $3 million. Throughout this process, I worked closely with Catherine, whose determination reminded me of my own journey. Like me, she had transformed her pain into purpose, becoming the public face of the case and encouraging other victims to come forward. "I never saw myself as an advocate," she confided during one of our strategy sessions. "I was embarrassed, felt foolish for being deceived. Your story changed that for me." Her words struck me profoundly. The legacy of betrayal could have been shame and isolation. Instead, it had become connection and empowerment. When the case finally went to trial, I sat in the courtroom watching Catherine deliver her victim impact statement with unwavering strength. The broader implications of our work became clear as the judge specifically cited the pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable women in delivering a sentence significantly heavier than standard guidelines recommended. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by women who had found justice through our collective efforts, Catherine embraced me tightly. "Thank you for showing me how to fight back." "You did the fighting," I reminded her. "I just helped you find the right weapons." That evening, as I walked through the guest house office, now expanded to include a legal resource center and financial literacy classroom, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The pain of Robert's betrayal had dulled to a distant memory, replaced by the satisfaction of creating something meaningful from its aftermath. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Turn on Channel 7 now." I flipped on the television to see Catherine being interviewed about the verdict, the caption identifying her as financial fraud activist and Morgan Foundation partner. With poise and clarity, she explained how our foundation helped victims navigate both the emotional and financial complexities of betrayal. "The Morgan Foundation taught me that financial justice is possible," she told the reporter. "Now we're working together to change how these cases are handled by financial institutions and law enforcement." The reporter turned to camera. "The Foundation's work has now led to proposed legislation that would create additional protections for clients and stronger penalties for financial advisors who exploit positions of trust." I hadn't known about the interview, and hearing our work characterized as potentially changing legislation filled me with unexpected emotion. What had begun as my personal fight for justice had evolved into a movement with implications far beyond my individual experience. The next morning, I received an email from a law professor at Georgetown University, inquiring about the possibility of documenting our foundation's methodologies for a textbook on financial crimes. "Your approach to coordinating between victims, law enforcement, and financial institutions represents an innovative model that could be replicated nationally," she wrote. As our work gained recognition, we faced new challenges. Financial institutions, initially resistant to acknowledging their role in enabling fraud, began reaching out about implementing improved safeguards. Law enforcement agencies requested training on recognizing and investigating patterns of financial exploitation. Requests for our educational resources flooded in from community organizations across the country. Growth required adaptation. We formalized our organizational structure, secured additional funding through grants and corporate partnerships, and developed standardized resources that could be implemented in communities nationwide. Jessica took charge of expanding our educational programs, while I focused on advocacy and partnership development. 3 years after establishing the foundation, I found myself testifying before a congressional committee on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. The nervous young woman who had once discovered her husband's betrayal had been replaced by a confident advocate with expertise born from painful experience. "Financial exploitation operates in shadows," I explained to the committee. "Predators rely on isolation, shame, and institutional indifference. Our foundation's success comes from illuminating these shadows, creating communities where victims recognize they aren't alone or at fault." After my testimony, a senior senator approached me privately. "My mother experienced something similar," she confided, "but 20 years ago, there weren't resources like your foundation. She never recovered, financially or emotionally." This pattern repeated itself countless times, people sharing similar stories of parents, siblings, friends who had experienced financial exploitation within relationships. Each conversation confirmed that our work addressed a pervasive problem that had long been dismissed as private misfortune rather than systematic exploitation. As the Foundation's 5th anniversary approached, we planned a national conference bringing together survivors, advocates, financial institutions, and policymakers. The guest list included representatives from the SEC, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and major banking institutions alongside survivors from across the country. During preparations, David called with unexpected news. Robert's being Released next week. Early parole for good behavior and completion of financial rehabilitation programs. The information landed differently than I might have anticipated years earlier. Instead of reopening old wounds, it felt like a footnote to a chapter long concluded. "Has he made any attempt to contact me?" I asked. "No," David replied. "The restraining order remains in effect, and his parole conditions include financial, monitoring, and prohibitions against working in financial services." I thanked David for the information and returned to reviewing conference materials. Robert's release seemed almost irrelevant to the person I had become and the work that now defined my life. The night before the conference, I walked alone through the expanded offices that had once been Robert's guest house. Photos lined the walls, women who had reclaimed their financial independence, teams of volunteers who staffed our hotlines, legislators who had championed our proposed protections. Each image represented a connection forged from shared purpose rather than exploitation. My reflection in the window caught me by surprise. The confident woman looking back bore little resemblance to the devastated wife who had watched her husband move his mistress onto their property. Time and purpose had transformed me in ways Robert could never have anticipated when he calculated how to exploit my trust. The conference exceeded our expectations, with over 500 attendees and coverage from major news outlets. During my keynote address, I surveyed the room filled with survivors, advocates, and institutional representatives united in combating financial exploitation. When personal betrayal intersects with financial fraud, the damage extends beyond bank accounts, I told the audience. It undermines our belief in our own judgment, our confidence in building new relationships, our fundamental sense of security. I paused, making eye contact with Catherine and other survivors who had become partners in our mission. But when we transform those individual experiences into collective action, something remarkable happens. We create networks of support that not only heal past wounds, but prevent future exploitation. We replace isolation with community, shame with empowerment, vulnerability with vigilance. The standing ovation that followed represented validation not just of my words, but of the journey all of us in that room had taken, from victims to advocates, from exploitation to empowerment. During the reception afterward, a young financial analyst approached me. "I implement the software that flags potential exploitation patterns," she explained. "But until today, I never fully understood the human impact of what we're preventing. Thank you for helping me see the people behind the data points." Her words crystallized something I had been feeling throughout the conference: the power of connecting technical solutions with human experiences. Financial exploitation thrived when treated as either a purely emotional issue or merely a technical violation. Our foundation's effectiveness came from addressing both simultaneously. The following week, as I reviewed conference feedback and planned next steps, Jessica arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The Downtown Design Center is available for lease," she announced. "Perfect location for expanding our operations, and the owner is willing to donate the first year's rent as a tax write-off." I studied the property information, immediately seeing the potential. The space would allow us to consolidate our growing programs under one roof while maintaining the guest house as our original headquarters, a symbolic connection to where our mission began. "It's perfect," I agreed. "But it means we're committing to significant growth." Jessica grinned. "Scared?" I laughed, realizing how far I had come from the woman who once feared confronting her husband's betrayal. "Excited," I corrected. "There's still so much to do." As plans for expansion progressed, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through David's office. The return address showed a rehabilitation facility in Northern California. Inside was a handwritten note from Natalie. "Chapman, you probably don't want to hear from me," she began, "but completing my recovery program requires making amends where possible. I've spent years understanding my role in what happened to you. While I can't undo the harm, I want you to know that Your confrontation that day ultimately saved me from continuing destructive patterns. The foundation you've built has helped me understand how I was both victim and participant in cycles of exploitation. I don't expect forgiveness, just wanted you to know that your strength changed more lives than you may realize. The letter left me with complex emotions, not anger or resentment, but a quiet acknowledgement that healing takes many forms for everyone touched by betrayal and exploitation. I chose not to respond directly, but sent information about our support programs to the rehabilitation facility, knowing they might benefit others on similar journeys. 6 years after discovering Robert in the guest house with Natalie, I stood on a stage accepting a National Advocacy Award for the Foundation's work. Looking out at the audience, I spotted many familiar faces: Catherine, now running our victim advocacy program; Melissa, who coordinated our volunteer networks; David, whose legal expertise had helped shape legislation in 3 states; Lisa, whose investigation skills had been instrumental in countless cases. This award belongs to everyone who has transformed personal pain into collective action, I told them. When my husband moved his mistress into our guest house and attempted to steal my investment properties, he believed he was writing the end of my story. Instead, he inadvertently launched the beginning of something much larger than either of us. The real victory wasn't just in reclaiming my properties or seeing Robert face consequences. It was in creating meaning from what could have been merely a painful conclusion. It was in building connections where isolation had been intended. It was in using privilege and resources to ensure other women had access to justice that might otherwise have been available only to those with means. Later, that evening, during the reception, a reporter asked what I considered the Foundation's greatest accomplishment. Changing the narrative, I replied without hesitation. Financial exploitation thrives when treated as personal embarrassment rather than criminal behavior. Our greatest achievement has been helping survivors recognize they're not alone or at fault, while simultaneously holding institutions accountable for enabling exploitation. And personally, the reporter pressed, what has been your greatest accomplishment through all this? I considered the question carefully. Learning that resilience isn't just about surviving betrayal, it's about creating something meaningful from the experience. The Foundation isn't merely a response to what happened to me, it's the purpose I found through that challenge. As the reception concluded, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The city lights spread before me, each representing homes and lives where similar stories might be unfolding. Betrayals large and small, people at crossroads of devastation and determination. I thought about the woman I had been 7 years earlier, standing frozen in my driveway as I processed what I was seeing through the guest house window. That moment could have defined me, locked me in victimhood and bitterness. Instead, it had become merely the catalyst for everything that followed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Governor just signed the Financial Protection Act, officially law in January. The legislation we had helped craft would create new protections for vulnerable adults, strengthen penalties for exploitation by fiduciaries, and establish mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions detecting suspicious patterns. It represented years of advocacy, countless survivor testimonies, and persistent education of legislators. I smiled, typing, Pakwadua, this calls for celebration. Guest house tomorrow afternoon? The guest house, once the physical manifestation of betrayal, had become the heart of a community dedicated to preventing others from experiencing similar pain. Its transformation perfectly paralleled my own journey from victim to advocate, from isolation to connection, from devastation to purpose. The following day, surrounded by our foundation team and key advocates who had helped secure the legislative victory, I raised a glass in the very space where my journey had begun. To everyone who transforms personal pain into positive change, I toasted. And to the power of reclaiming our narratives. Catherine approached me as the celebration continued around us. "I've been meaning to tell you something," she said, quietly. A woman called our hotline last week, devastated after discovering her business partner had been embezzling for years. She was contemplating suicide before she found our number. After 3 days of working with our crisis team, she decided to fight back instead. She's filing charges next week. "That's what this is all about," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Turning points, showing people there's a path forward when they can't see it themselves." Later, alone in the office that had once been Robert's love nest with Natalie, I reviewed photographs from the various phases of the foundation's growth. Each image captured a moment of transformation. The first, workshop with 10 nervous participants. The press conference announcing our first successful legislative initiative. Catherine's triumphant smile after winning her case. The ribbon cutting at our downtown center. My attention was drawn to a framed document on the wall. The deed to this property, now owned free and clear by the foundation. What Robert had intended to steal had become the cornerstone of something he could never have imagined. The final transfer of the property from my personal ownership to the foundation had felt like closing a circle, completing the transformation from personal asset to community resource. Outside the window, twilight settled over the garden I had redesigned with healing in mind. Lavender and rosemary for resilience, oak for strength, flowing water for renewal. Visitors often commented on its peaceful energy, never knowing the betrayal that had once occupied this space. 7 years earlier, I had discovered my husband moving his mistress into our guest house as part of his plan to steal my investment properties. That moment could have been an ending of my marriage, my financial security, my trust in my own judgment. Instead, it had become the foundation upon which I built not just a new life, but a movement that had helped hundreds of women reclaim their own power. The ultimate revenge wasn't in taking back what was mine or seeing Robert face consequences. It was in creating something meaningful from what he had tried to destroy, something that would continue making a difference long after our individual story had faded from memory. As I locked up the guest house that evening, I ran my hand along the frame of the door where I had once confronted Natalie. The wood was smooth, refinished during renovations that had transformed the space from a symbol of betrayal to a beacon of empowerment. Like that door frame, I too had been reshaped by what had happened here, not erased or diminished, but strengthened and repurposed. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, believing it was the beginning of my end. Instead, it had become the foundation for countless new beginnings, mine and so many others. In that transformation lay the most profound justice of all. 8 years after that fateful day when I discovered Robert's betrayal, the Morgan Foundation had become a nationally recognized organization with offices in 6 cities. What began as my personal journey through trauma had evolved into an institution that would outlast any individual story, including my own. The work had taken me to places I never expected, from congressional hearings to international conferences on financial crimes. Yet amid the growth and accolades, I found myself facing an unexpected challenge: maintaining connection to our mission's emotional core while managing an organization that now employed 47 people. That Tuesday morning, I arrived at our downtown headquarters early, wanting quiet time before our quarterly board meeting. The modern building with its glass facade and eco-friendly design stood in stark contrast to the renovated guest house, where everything had begun. Both spaces served important functions, the downtown office providing the infrastructure for our expanding programs, while the original guest house remained our heart, hosting support groups and offering a more intimate setting for those just beginning their healing journey. As I reviewed the quarterly reports, I noted with satisfaction that our victim support services had assisted 312 individuals over the past 3 months. Our legal advocacy program had successfully recovered over $7 million in stolen assets, and our educational workshops had reached more than 2,000 people across 3 states. The numbers told a story of impact that exceeded anything I could have imagined when I first channeled my pain into purpose. My assistant Julia knocked gently before entering. "The governor's office called again about the appointment," she informed me, placing a coffee on my desk. "They're hoping for an answer by Friday." I nodded, adding it to my mental list of decisions requiring attention. Governor Elizabeth Chen had recently offered me a position heading the state's new Office of Financial Protection and Consumer Advocacy, a department whose creation our foundation had championed. The role represented an opportunity to institutionalize the changes we'd been fighting for, embedding protections directly into governmental structures rather than operating alongside them. "Ms. Winters is waiting in the conference room," Julia added. She arrived early for her orientation. Ellen Winters, no relation to Stephanie, from Robert's past, was our newest hire, joining our legal team after a distinguished career as a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. Her expertise would strengthen our work with law enforcement, addressing a persistent gap in how financial exploitation cases were handled in the criminal justice system. I greeted Ellen warmly, immediately appreciating the sharp intelligence behind her measured responses as we discussed her role. After reviewing her responsibilities and introducing her to key team members, I walked her to our wall of impact, a physical representation of our foundation's work through photographs, testimonials, and milestone achievements. "When we first started," I explained, gesturing to the earliest photos, "most financial institutions had no protocol for recognizing or responding to exploitation within relationships. Law enforcement often dismissed these cases as civil matters. Victims had nowhere to turn." Ellen studied the progression of images, her expression thoughtful. "And now?" 27 states have adopted enhanced protections based on our model legislation. 8 major financial institutions have implemented the identification protocols we developed. Over 4,000 law enforcement officers have completed our training program. I paused, touching a photograph of Catherine standing outside the courthouse after winning her case. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The real impact is in individual lives transformed. After concluding Ellen's orientation, I returned to my office to prepare for the board meeting. My phone rang with a familiar Washington, D.C. area code. "Rebecca," Senator Maria Vasquez greeted me. "I'm calling to personally invite you to the bill signing next month. Your testimony was instrumental in getting this legislation across the finish line." The Financial Empowerment and Protection Act represented nearly 3 years of advocacy work, with provisions that would strengthen penalties for financial exploitation, create new safeguards within banking systems, and establish a national resource center for victims. Its passage marked our most significant policy achievement to date. "I wouldn't miss it, Senator," I assured her. "This legislation will change countless lives." "It already has," she replied. 2 of my colleagues shared personal stories after your testimony, experiences their families had never discussed publicly before. You're changing not just laws, but the conversation itself. As the board meeting commenced that afternoon, I presented our strategic plan for the coming year, highlighting 3 core priorities: expanding our direct services to underserved communities, strengthening our prevention education in partnership with schools and community organizations, and developing new technologies to help financial institutions identify exploitation patterns earlier. "The foundation has exceeded all projected growth metrics," noted Walter Freeman, our board treasurer and a retired bank executive who had become an unexpected ally after his sister experienced financial exploitation by her son. "The question becomes how we maintain quality while scaling operations. That's precisely why our regional hub model is so important," I explained. "Each office maintains local connections and cultural competence while implementing our core methodologies. We're not building a monolith, but a network." The discussion continued, addressing funding sustainability, program evaluation, and succession planning, the complex operational realities underlying our mission. These conversations were far removed from the raw emotional intensity of my early days confronting Robert's betrayal, yet they were equally essential to creating lasting change. After the meeting concluded, I found myself drawn to visit the guest house, a practice that had become something of a ritual whenever I needed to reconnect with the foundation's origins. The short drive from downtown provided a transitional space between administrative responsibilities and emotional purpose. The guest house had undergone multiple renovations as our programs evolved, but we had deliberately preserved certain elements: the original stone fireplace where our first support group had gathered, the bay window where I had confronted Natalie, the garden path where I had walked in shock after discovering Robert's betrayal. These physical touchstones reminded everyone who worked with us that our sophisticated organizational structure had emerged from lived experience. Inside, a support group for partners of white-collar criminals was just concluding. I recognized 2 participants from intake interviews: a physician whose husband had embezzled from their joint practice, and a teacher whose wife had secretly mortgaged their home to cover gambling debts. Their presence reminded me why maintaining this intimate space alongside our larger operations remained crucial. After the participants departed, I sat alone in the gathering room, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The acute pain of Robert's betrayal had long since transformed into something different, not forgotten, but integrated into a larger narrative that included purpose, growth, and connection. My phone vibrated with a text from Lisa, who had become our director of investigations after closing her private practice. "You need to see this. New pattern emerging across multiple cases." I drove back downtown, where Lisa waited in our secure analysis room. On multiple screens, she displayed financial records from 6 seemingly unrelated cases across 3 states. "All referred to us in the past 4 months," she explained, highlighting transaction patterns. "Different financial institutions, different relationship dynamics, but identical methodologies." I studied the data, recognizing a sophisticated approach to financial exploitation that exceeded what individual perpetrators typically managed. "This looks coordinated." "Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "We're potentially looking at an organized operation targeting vulnerable individuals through trust-based relationships. The technical complexity suggests professional expertise." For the next 3 hours, we analyzed the patterns with growing concern. The sophistication of the operation, utilizing international transfers, identity manipulation, and technical vulnerabilities within banking systems, indicated something beyond individual opportunism. "We need to involve federal authorities," I decided finally. "This crosses jurisdictional boundaries and involves international finance." By evening, we had arranged a secure briefing with representatives from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Our foundation's evolution from supporting individual victims to identifying systemic exploitation patterns represented a natural progression, but placed us in increasingly complex territory. The following day brought another unexpected development. An email arrived from Stanford University, inviting me to consider a visiting professorship in their business ethics program. "Your practical experience bridging financial systems, legal frameworks, and human impact represents precisely the perspective we hope to incorporate into our curriculum," the department chair wrote. These opportunities, the governor's appointment, and now the academic position, required decisions about my personal path forward. The foundation had grown beyond my individual leadership, with Catherine now serving as executive director and a robust management team overseeing daily operations. Perhaps my most valuable contribution moving forward lay in different arenas: policy development, academic research, or institutional reform. As I contemplated these possibilities during my evening run along the waterfront, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. "Ms. Morgan, this is Amanda Sinclair from River Valley Retirement Community." The woman's professional tone carried an undertone of concern. "I'm calling about Robert Mercer. You're listed as his emergency contact." The statement momentarily disoriented me. I hadn't been Robert's emergency contact in nearly 8 years. We had no contact since his sentencing, maintained no connection beyond the legal documents dissolving our marriage. "There must be a mistake," I replied. "We've been divorced for years." "I understand," Amanda continued carefully. "However, you remain listed in his advance directive, which was never updated. Mr. Mercer has been diagnosed with early-onset dementia. His condition has deteriorated rapidly in recent weeks." The information landed with surprising impact. Robert, the man whose calculated betrayal had altered the course of my life, was facing cognitive decline that would gradually erase the very capacity for manipulation that had defined him. "I'm not sure why you're contacting me," I said finally. "We haven't spoken in years." "Normally, we wouldn't involve estranged relations," Amanda explained. "However, Mr. Mercer has no other listed contacts, and certain financial and medical decisions will require legal authority if his condition continues to deteriorate." I assured her I would have my attorney contact their facility, then ended. The call, standing motionless on the waterfront path as joggers and cyclists moved around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had attempted to exploit my financial assets now faced vulnerability himself, with no one to advocate for his interests. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto my balcony overlooking the city lights. The call had stirred complicated emotions. Not residual attachment or responsibility toward Robert, but recognition of life's unpredictable arcs. The man who had once seemed so completely in control, orchestrating elaborate deceptions, would gradually lose control of his own mind. I called David, who had remained both legal counsel and friend throughout the Foundation's growth. After explaining the situation, I asked, "What are my legal obligations here?" "None whatsoever," he assured me. The divorce settlement severed all responsibilities. Being listed on an outdated advance directive creates no obligation. I can contact the facility and ensure they understand the situation. I thanked him, but found myself still unsettled after we hung up. The next morning, I discussed the situation with Catherine during our weekly executive meeting. "You seem troubled by this," she observed with the insight of someone who had walked a similar path. "Not troubled, exactly," I tried to explain. "More contemplative. There's something about the symmetry. Robert losing control after building his life around controlling others." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "What are you considering?" "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "Not direct involvement, certainly, but perhaps ensuring basic protections are in place. No one deserves exploitation, even those who have exploited others. This principle, that financial protection should extend to everyone, regardless of past actions, had become fundamental to our Foundation's work. We had assisted individuals with complicated histories, including those who had enabled exploitation before experiencing it themselves. Our mission focused on changing systems and behaviors, not making moral judgments about who deserved protection. After careful consideration, I asked David to establish a limited conservatorship for Robert's medical decisions, administered through a professional fiduciary service with no direct connection to me. This arrangement would ensure basic protections, without creating ongoing personal involvement. "You're showing remarkable grace," David commented when I explained my decision. "Not grace," I corrected him. "Consistency with our principles. The Foundation exists to prevent financial exploitation in all forms. That has to apply universally if it means anything at all." This resolution regarding Robert coincided with important transitions in other areas of my life. After extensive discussions with the Foundation's board and leadership team, I decided to accept both the governor's appointment and a modified version of Stanford's offer, teaching 1 semester annually while maintaining an advisory role with the Foundation. These changes represented not departure but evolution, expanding our work's impact through policy implementation and education while maintaining connection to the organization's core mission. Catherine was more than ready to assume full executive leadership, bringing her own lived experience and professional expertise to the role. As these transitions progressed, we prepared for the Foundation's 10th anniversary, a milestone that prompted reflection on how far we had come. The commemoration would include a national conference bringing together survivors, advocates, policymakers, and institutional representatives to chart the next decade of progress in preventing financial exploitation. During preparation for the YA event, I found myself reviewing archives from our earliest days. Handwritten notes from first meetings, primitive spreadsheets tracking initial cases, photographs of the guest house before its first renovation. These artifacts carried emotional resonance that transcended their practical significance, embodying the journey from personal crisis to collective purpose. Among these materials, I discovered a journal I had kept during the first year after discovering Robert's betrayal. The raw emotions captured in those pages, anger, grief, determination, occasional despair, felt both intimately familiar and strangely distant, like reading about someone I had once known but had since evolved beyond. One entry particularly captured my attention. I refused to let his betrayal define me. Somehow I will create meaning from this pain, not just for myself, but for others facing similar situations. There must be purpose beyond the personal. Those words, written in a moment of determination amid devastation, had manifested beyond anything I could have imagined. The Foundation now employed dozens of dedicated professionals, supported thousands of survivors annually, and had fundamentally changed how financial institutions and legal systems addressed exploitation within relationships. The anniversary conference exceeded all expectations, bringing together over 700 participants from across the country and internationally. Opening the event felt surreal, standing before this diverse gathering of survivors, professionals, and policymakers united by commitment to preventing the very exploitation that had once left me feeling isolated and violated. 10 years ago, I began my keynote address. A personal betrayal forced me to recognize how vulnerability exists within even the most seemingly secure relationships. What began as one woman's fight to reclaim her financial autonomy has evolved into a movement transforming how our society understands, identifies, and prevents financial exploitation. Looking out at the audience, I saw individuals whose stories I knew intimately. Catherine, whose case against her financial advisor had helped establish legal precedents now cited in courts nationwide. Martin, whose elderly mother's exploitation by a caregiver had inspired him to establish a senior protection program. Sophia, who had transformed her experience of financial abuse into award-winning investigative journalism exposing systemic failures. The true measure of our impact isn't in statistics or legislation, though those matter tremendously, I continued. It's in the individual journeys from victimization to empowerment, from isolation to community, from devastation to purpose. It's in creating spaces where exploitation can be named without shame and addressed without judgment. Throughout the 3-day conference, I witnessed countless moments that embodied this transformation. Survivors offering guidance to those newly discovering financial betrayal, financial institutions implementing protocols developed from victim experiences, law enforcement officers learning to recognize exploitation patterns they had previously missed. During the closing reception, I found a quiet moment alone on the venue's terrace, reflecting on the symmetry between personal and organizational evolution. My own healing had paralleled the Foundation's development. Initial rawness giving way to structured response, reactive pain transforming into proactive purpose, individual experience expanding into collective action. Catherine joined me, champagne, flute in hand. Quite the milestone, she observed, gesturing toward the celebration inside. How does it feel? I considered her question carefully. Like witnessing something that has grown beyond its origins to become something I couldn't have imagined. not unlike watching a child develop their own identity. An apt metaphor, Catherine agreed. The foundation has definitely developed its own life force. We stood in comfortable silence, overlooking the city lights. Catherine had become not just a colleague, but a true friend, our shared experiences creating understanding that required no explanation. "I visited Robert yesterday," I said finally, sharing something I hadn't planned to mention, "before he loses all capacity to recognize his past." Catherine's expression registered surprise, but not judgment. "How was that?" "Strange," I admitted. "Poignant in ways I hadn't anticipated. He recognized me, but there's significant cognitive decline. The nurses say he frequently confuses past and present, sometimes believing we're still married, other times recognizing the reality." The visit had been brief and supervised, a final closure rather than reconciliation. Robert's momentary lucidity had allowed him to acknowledge, perhaps for the first time, the harm he had caused. Whether this represented genuine remorse or simply diminished capacity for manipulation remained uncertain. Either way, the encounter had provided unexpected peace. "I realized something important," I told Catherine. "His betrayal no longer holds emotional power over me. It's simply an event that happened, one that shaped my path, but no longer defines my experience." This liberation represented the most personal measure of the distance traveled over 10 years, from devastation to a place where Robert's actions existed as historical fact rather than active emotional wound. The pain had been transformed, alchemized into purpose that extended far beyond our individual story. 2 weeks after the anniversary conference, I officially transitioned to my new roles with the governor's office in Stanford, while maintaining an advisory position with the foundation. The changes felt not like departure but expansion, applying our core principles in new contexts while supporting Catherine's vision for the organization's future. My first major initiative in the governor's office involved designing comprehensive financial protection standards for vulnerable adults, creating systemic safeguards rather than relying solely on individual vigilance. The work built directly upon the foundation's accumulated knowledge, transforming hard-won insights into institutional reforms. At Stanford, my course on ethics in financial relationships quickly became oversubscribed, attracting students from business, law, psychology, and social work. Their engagement confirmed the hunger for approaches that bridged theoretical frameworks with lived experiences, precisely the integration our foundation had pioneered. Throughout these professional evolutions, the renovated guest house remained a touchstone, not just as the foundation's original home, but as physical embodiment of transformation. What Robert had intended as space for deception had become a center for healing, education, and advocacy. 10 years and 3 months after discovering my husband moving his mistress into our guest house, I stood in that very space conducting a workshop for financial institutions developing exploitation prevention protocols. The participants, compliance. Officers, fraud investigators, customer service managers, listened intently as I explained how relationship dynamics create unique vulnerabilities that traditional fraud prevention often misses. Financial exploitation within relationships operates differently from other fraud, I explained. It leverages intimate knowledge, emotional connection, and institutional assumptions about joint assets. Effective prevention requires understanding these dynamics rather than simply applying standard fraud metrics. As the participants engaged with case studies and practical applications, I felt profound satisfaction in witnessing professionals from institutions that had once dismissed such exploitation as private matters, now investing resources in prevention and response. After the workshop concluded, I walked through the garden that had been redesigned as a meditation space for survivors attending our programs. The carefully selected plants, flowing water feature, and comfortable seating areas created an environment of tranquility that contrasted sharply with the anguish many brought to our programs. Sitting on a stone bench amid blooming lavender, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Robert's betrayal had initially appeared as devastating conclusion to my marriage, my financial security, my trust in my own judgment. Instead, it had become prologue to something far more significant than either of us could have imagined. The pain that once felt all-consuming had been transformed into purpose that extended beyond personal vindication. The isolation that initially accompanied betrayal had evolved into community that supported thousands navigating similar experiences. The violation of trust that had shaken my foundations had ultimately led to strengthening societal safeguards, protecting others from similar exploitation. This transformation represented the most meaningful response to betrayal, not mere survival or even personal success, but creation of systemic change that would outlast individual experience. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, intending to steal my investment properties and dismantle the financial independence I had carefully built. Instead, his actions had inadvertently catalyzed a movement that strengthened financial autonomy for countless others. There was profound justice in this outcome, not the narrow satisfaction of individual retribution, but the expansive impact of transforming personal violation into collective empowerment. What began with one woman refusing to be victimized had evolved into institutional change, touching thousands of lives across the country. As dusk settled over the garden, I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring meetings with the governor's task force, consultations with the foundation's legal team, preparation for my upcoming Stanford seminar. The work continued evolving, expanding, adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Walking to my car, I passed the guest house windows where I had first glimpsed Robert and Natalie together, the moment that had irrevocably altered my life's trajectory. The space beyond those windows now housed our Survivor Intake Center, where individuals took their first steps from crisis toward empowerment. The symmetry felt like poetry. The precise location where betrayal had been revealed now served as entry point for others beginning their own journeys toward reclamation and purpose. This transformation of space perfectly mirrored the larger alchemy we had achieved, converting pain into power, violation into vision, betrayal into beginnings. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, believing it marked the end of what I had built. Instead, it had become foundation for something far greater than either of us could have imagined, a legacy of protection, empowerment, and systemic change that would continue long after our individual story faded from memory. 12 years after Robert's betrayal, I found myself in a position I never could have anticipated during those raw, early days of discovery and determination. The Morgan Foundation had evolved from a personal mission into an institution with international reach, while my own role had expanded beyond the organization I had founded. As special advisor to the Federal Financial Protection Bureau, I divided my time between Washington, D.C. and our foundation's headquarters, bridging the worlds of policy and direct service in ways that leveraged both perspectives. This particular Wednesday morning found me testifying before an international commission on economic security and gender equity, presenting our research on patterns of financial exploitation in intimate relationships across cultural contexts. The ornate United Nations conference room in Geneva seemed worlds away from the guest house where my journey had begun, yet the core truths remained consistent regardless of geography or economic system. Financial exploitation follows recognizable patterns that transcend cultural boundaries, I explained to the assembled representatives from 38 countries. While specific mechanisms may vary based on legal structures and financial systems, the underlying dynamics of power, trust, and vulnerability remain remarkably consistent. A delegate from Singapore raised her hand. Your foundation's approach integrates legal, financial, and psychological frameworks in addressing these issues. How can countries with different institutional structures adapt this integrated model? Her question reflected how far our work had progressed, from addressing my individual experience to developing methodologies applicable across diverse contexts. The Morgan Foundation now provided consultation to governments and financial institutions globally, adapting our core principles to varied cultural and legal environments. After concluding my testimony, I met with representatives from several European countries interested in implementing variations of the protective protocols we had developed. These conversations highlighted both the universal nature of relationship-based financial exploitation and the necessity of culturally specific approaches to prevention and intervention. That evening, as I packed for my return flight to the States, my phone rang with a call from Catherine. Despite the late hour in Geneva, I answered immediately, knowing she wouldn't call during an international trip without important reason. "We've received an unusual request," she began without preamble. "Natalie Chapman has applied to volunteer with our prevention education program." The name still carried emotional weight, though greatly diminished by time and perspective. Natalie, the woman I had discovered with Robert in our guest house 12 years earlier, had maintained no contact since her letter from rehabilitation. According to Lisa's periodic updates, she had completed recovery programs, earned a degree in psychology, and established a modest career as a counselor specializing in relationship addiction. "What's your assessment?" I asked, trusting Catherine's judgment implicitly. "Her application is compelling," Catherine replied. "She's been sober 8 years, has relevant professional credentials, and her personal statement directly addresses her past involvement in exploitation dynamics. Her references include her recovery sponsor and 2 respected therapists." I considered the complex symmetry of Natalie potentially contributing to the very organization catalyzed by circumstances in which she had participated. What would her role involve? She's specifically interested in our young adult prevention program, helping college students recognize early warning signs of financially exploitative relationships. No direct work with victims, strictly prevention education. The Foundation's growth had necessitated clear policies regarding volunteers and staff with complicated histories. We recognized that lived experience, even from complex perspectives, often provided valuable insights when properly channeled. Several of our most effective prevention educators were individuals who had participated in exploitative behavior before experiencing their own awakening to its harm. Follow the standard protocol, I decided. Complete background check, ethics committee review, supervised provisional period. If she meets all our requirements, her history with me specifically shouldn't disqualify her. This decision reflected both professional principle and personal evolution. The Foundation's mission transcended individual stories, including my own, focusing instead on systemic change that could prevent future exploitation regardless of its source. After returning to Washington, I presented our international findings to the Interagency Task Force on Financial Crimes. The federal position I had accepted 2 years earlier allowed me to influence policy at a level I once would have considered unimaginable, transforming insights from individual cases into structural protections embedded within financial systems themselves. The most effective interventions occur at multiple levels simultaneously, I explained to the assembled representatives from Treasury, Justice, and regulatory agencies. Individual education, institutional safeguards, and legal frameworks must work in concert rather than isolation. FBI Assistant Director Marcus Williams nodded in agreement. Your Foundation's analysis helped us identify a systemic exploitation pattern targeting military spouses that had gone undetected for years. The integrated approach works. These acknowledgments from institutional leaders represented significant progress from the early days when financial exploitation within relationships was dismissed as merely domestic matters, unworthy of serious attention from law enforcement or financial regulators. The following week, I returned to our headquarters for quarterly strategic planning. The Foundation now occupied a renovated historical building downtown, a far cry from the guest house where we had begun. Though we maintained the original location as our Victim Services Center, honoring the symmetry of transformation that defined our work. As I walked through the light-filled offices, greeting staff members who represented diverse professional backgrounds and personal experiences, I reflected on how completely the organization had evolved beyond its origins in my individual trauma. What began as one woman's response to betrayal had developed its own institutional identity, with methodology, culture, and impact that would continue regardless of my personal involvement. Catherine greeted me with a quick embrace before updating me on key developments during my international assignment. The prevention curriculum has been adopted by 57 additional universities, she reported as we walked to the conference room. Early evaluation shows significant increases in students' ability to identify concerning financial patterns in relationships. And the banking protocol implementation? Exceeding projections, 17 financial institutions have fully integrated our identification system. Early detection rates for suspicious transaction patterns have increased 42%. These statistics represented real-world impact. Vulnerability reduced, exploitation prevented, lives spared the devastation I had experienced when discovering Robert's betrayal. The numbers mattered not as abstract metrics, but as indicators of harm avoided and autonomy preserved. Our executive team had grown to include individuals with expertise in fields ranging from forensic accounting to trauma psychology, criminal, justice to financial technology. As we gathered for strategic planning, the diversity of perspectives reflected how comprehensively we approached financial exploitation, recognizing its intersections with other forms of abuse while maintaining focus on our specific mission. Before we begin, Catherine announced once everyone had settled, I'd like to acknowledge a significant milestone. This month marks 12 years since Rebecca founded the organization. The Financial Security Through Empowerment Act, which she helped craft, has been implemented nationally for 1 full year. Initial data shows a 28% increase in prevention and early intervention. The team applauded, several offering personal reflections on the foundation's growth since Yao joining. These acknowledgments touched me deeply, not from personal pride, but because they confirmed the work's sustainability beyond individual leadership, the true measure of institutional impact. After comprehensive discussion of strategic priorities and resource allocation, we addressed a sensitive topic: Natalie Chapman's application to volunteer with our prevention program. The Ethics Committee had completed their review process, including extensive interviews and background verification. Ms. Chapman meets all technical requirements, reported Gabriela Martinez, our ethics director. Her professional credentials are solid, recovery history well documented, and she demonstrates sophisticated understanding of exploitation dynamics from multiple perspectives. The committee recommends approval with standard supervision protocols. I maintained appropriate professional distance from the decision, having established early in the foundation's development that my personal history should not dictate organizational policy. The committee's recommendation was accepted without special intervention, establishing Natalie's provisional volunteer status with clear parameters and supervision requirements. That evening, I visited the Guest House Center, drawn by a need to reconnect with our origins amid the expanding institutional complexity. The space had undergone multiple renovations over the years while deliberately preserving certain elements: the bay window where I had confronted Natalie, the stone fireplace where our first support group had gathered, the garden path where I had walked in shock after discovering Robert's betrayal. A support group for family members of exploitation victims was concluding their session in the main room. I waited quietly in the adjoining office until they finished, observing without intruding on their vulnerable process. Their facilitator, Marco, had joined our team after his mother experienced devastating financial abuse by a caregiver, another example of personal pain transformed into professional purpose. After the participants departed, Marco joined me briefly. "Powerful session today," he commented. 3 new members, including a father whose daughter lost everything to an investment scheme run by her fiancé. "How are they processing?" I asked. knowing the unique challenges faced by those supporting survivors. The usual stages: anger, guilt for not recognizing warning signs, determination to help recover what was lost. The father's actually connecting with our legal team tomorrow about potential recovery options. These ripple effects, the ways exploitation impacted entire family systems rather than just individual victims, had become increasingly central to our understanding and methodology. Financial crimes committed within intimate relationships damaged not just economic security, but fundamental trust in human connection itself. After Marco left, I sat alone in the quiet space, allowing memories to surface without resistance. The acute pain that once accompanied thoughts of Robert and his betrayal had long since transmuted into something different, not forgotten, but integrated within a larger narrative that included purpose, growth, and connection, far exceeding anything that existed during our marriage. My phone vibrated with a text from David, who remained both legal counsel and friend despite his semi-retirement. Thought you should know. Robert passed away yesterday. Nursing staff found him early morning. The news landed with surprising gentleness. Robert's decline had progressed steadily over recent years, his once sharp mind gradually erased by dementia. The conservatorship we had established ensured appropriate care while maintaining clear boundaries. I had visited him just once since. His diagnosis, seeking closure rather than reconciliation, finding both in witnessing how completely his capacity for manipulation had been stripped away by neurological deterioration. I texted back a simple acknowledgement, feeling neither grief nor satisfaction, only a quiet recognition that a chapter had conclusively ended. Robert's death held no power to disrupt the life and purpose I had built in the aftermath of his betrayal. The following morning brought a different kind of connection to the past when I received an email from Ellen Whitaker, one of Robert's previous victims whom we had identified during our investigation 12 years earlier. After we had reached out to inform her about Robert's fraud patterns, Ellen had rebuilt her life, eventually becoming a financial advisor, specializing in helping women establish independent security. We had maintained occasional contact over the years, sharing professional resources rather than dwelling on our shared history. "I saw the news about Robert," she wrote. "Strange how little it affects me now, when once he dominated my every thought. The work you've built from that experience has helped thousands. There's poetry in that outcome." Her words captured something essential about transformation, not simply personal healing, but the alchemy of converting individual pain into collective purpose. The Foundation's impact had long since transcended its catalyzing betrayal, creating meaning that extended far beyond my personal vindication or Robert's eventual consequences. That afternoon, I met with Governor Elizabeth Chen, who had championed our state's implementation of protective legislation and whose administration had partnered with our foundation on several key initiatives. After discussing current projects, she shared news that would open yet another unexpected chapter. "The President is establishing a special commission on economic security and exploitation prevention," she explained, sliding a folder across her desk. "Your name heads the shortlist for appointment as commission chair. The position would involve developing federal policy recommendations, coordinating across multiple agencies, and creating national standards for prevention and intervention, essentially, scaling the integrated approach we had pioneered through the Foundation to federal systems. This represents unprecedented recognition of these issues at the highest level," the governor continued. "The Commission's recommendations could fundamentally reshape how our financial and legal systems address exploitation within relationships." I accepted the folder, recognizing both the extraordinary opportunity and the complex considerations it entailed. Such a position would require relocation to Washington and significant adjustment to my foundation responsibilities. Yet it also offered potential to institutionalize protections at a scale no private organization could achieve independently. "I'll need to discuss this with our board and leadership team," I told her. The Foundation's continuity remains my priority. Governor Chen nodded understanding. Of course, the administration anticipates a transition period if you accept. They value your organizational leadership as much as your individual expertise. This conversation marked another milestone in an evolution I could never have anticipated during those early days of shock and determination. From fighting for my own financial justice to potentially shaping national policy affecting millions of lives. Over dinner that evening with Jessica, who had remained my closest friend throughout the Foundation's development, I processed the complex emotions surrounding these convergent events. Robert's death, the presidential commission opportunity, Natalie's application to volunteer, the Foundation's continued expansion. It's like multiple timelines converging, Jessica observed as we shared a bottle of wine in a quiet corner of her restaurant. Past, present, and potential future all intersecting at once. Exactly, I agreed. 12 years ago, I was focused solely on reclaiming what Robert tried to steal. I couldn't have imagined where that path would lead. Jessica smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. That's because you were never really fighting just for yourself, even when it seemed that way. You were fighting for something larger, the principle that trust shouldn't be weaponized, that vulnerability shouldn't be exploited. Her insight captured something fundamental about the journey, how personal determination had naturally expanded into systemic advocacy, how individual justice had evolved into institutional reform. The through line connecting these stages wasn't just my experience, but the underlying values that had guided my response to betrayal. The next morning, I visited the cemetery where my parents were buried, seeking quiet space for reflection before making decisions about the commission appointment. Their graves were well maintained, fresh flowers indicating my brother's recent visit. I placed my own bouquet beside his, then settled on the nearby bench overlooking the valley. My parents had died before Robert's betrayal, spared knowledge of both his deception and my subsequent transformation. Yet their influence permeated every aspect of my response. My father's unwavering integrity, my mother's resilient determination, their shared belief in creating meaning beyond personal circumstance. I think you would be proud, I said softly to their memorial stones. Not of what I've achieved, but of how meaning was created from pain. That's your legacy as much as mine. This connection to something larger than individual experience, whether through family heritage, organizational mission, or policy impact, had become central to my understanding of transformation. True healing emerged not just from personal recovery, but from contributing to collective well-being that extended beyond oneself. Later that day, I convened a special meeting with the Foundation's executive team and board chairs to discuss the presidential commission opportunity. Rather than presenting a predetermined decision, I sought their perspectives on how such a transition might impact our organization's effectiveness and mission fulfillment. This appointment represents extraordinary recognition of the issues we've championed, noted Walter Freeman, our board chair. The question becomes how we maximize impact across both institutional spheres. Catherine, who had grown into an exceptional leader in her own right, offered measured assessment. The Foundation has developed sustainable systems and leadership depth. While your involvement remains invaluable, our impact no longer depends exclusively on your direct management. For 2 hours, we explored potential structures that would maintain organizational integrity while allowing me to contribute at federal policy levels. The conversation reflected remarkable institutional maturity, thoughtful consideration of mission, strategy, and sustainability, rather than personality-driven decision-making. What if we frame this not as departure, but evolution? Suggested Gabriella. Your role shifts to strategic advisor and policy liaison, while Catherine advances to full executive leadership, with structured communication channels between Foundation initiatives and Commission priorities. This framework acknowledged both institutional needs and the unique opportunity to extend our impact through federal systems. By evening, we had developed a comprehensive transition plan that would preserve organizational stability while leveraging the commission appointment to advance our core mission at national scale. The following week brought implementation of this carefully crafted transition. I maintained my office at Foundation headquarters while establishing preliminary Washington connections, working closely with Catherine to ensure seamless leadership continuity. The process reinforced how completely the organization had evolved beyond its origin in my personal experience, developing methodology, culture, and impact that transcended individual leadership. During this transition period, I received notification that Natalie Chapman had completed her provisional volunteer training and received approval for supervised participation in our college prevention program. The Ethics Committee report indicated she had demonstrated both professional competence and authentic commitment to exploitation prevention, with her personal experience providing valuable insight when appropriately contextualized. The symmetry was undeniable. The woman who had participated in circumstances catalyzing the Foundation's creation, now contributing to its prevention mission. This development represented neither redemption narrative nor ironic twist, but simply another manifestation of our core principle: that exploitation patterns could be interrupted through awareness and accountability, regardless of one's starting point. My path intersected with Natalie's directly during a prevention curriculum training session, where I was scheduled to present our research on early warning signs in financially exploitative relationships. She sat among 24 volunteer educators, professional in appearance, and engaged in the material without calling attention to herself. During a break between sessions, we found ourselves alone, briefly in the refreshment area. The moment carried potential awkwardness, yet felt strangely normalized by time and institutional context. "I wasn't sure if you knew I'd applied to volunteer," she said directly, meeting my gaze with clear-eyed sobriety that contrasted sharply with my memories of her from 12 years earlier. "I was informed," I replied evenly. "The Ethics Committee recommended your approval based on established criteria." Natalie nodded, understanding the deliberate professional framing. "I wouldn't have applied without their thorough evaluation process. This organization has become too important to too many people to risk its reputation." Her recognition of the Foundation's significance beyond our individual histories reflected precisely why her application had been considered on its merits, rather than automatically rejected. Financial exploitation prevention required perspective from all positions within its dynamics, provided appropriate boundaries, and accountability remained central. "Your prevention curriculum saved my niece from an exploitative relationship last year," Natalie continued after a momentary pause. "She recognized warning signs from your college workshop that I missed completely in my own history. That full circle moment convinced me I might have something meaningful to contribute." This connection, personal experience informing professional purpose, mirrored the Foundation's origin story while extending beyond it. What began as my response to betrayal had evolved into methodology and resources that prevented similar exploitation across generations and relationships. "The work speaks for itself," I acknowledged before returning to the training room, neither rejecting nor particularly embracing this unexpected connection, but simply allowing it to exist within appropriate professional parameters. The following month brought formal announcement of my appointment to the Presidential Commission, triggering media attention that focused primarily on the Foundation's impact rather than my personal history. This shift in narrative emphasis represented significant progress from early days when coverage inevitably centered on Robert's betrayal, rather than the systemic issues it illuminated. My final official act before beginning the commission appointment was presiding over dedication of the Foundation's new research center, a state-of-the-art facility focused on developing evidence-based interventions and measuring long-term outcomes of financial exploitation prevention efforts. Standing at the podium before assembled staff, board members, donors, and community partners, I surveyed the remarkable ecosystem that had developed from seeds planted in personal pain 12 years earlier. The Foundation now employed 87 People across 3 states operated prevention programs in over 600 colleges and universities, partnered with 37 financial institutions on early detection protocols, and provided direct services to thousands of survivors annually. When betrayal intersects with financial exploitation, the damage extends beyond economic security to fundamental trust, I told the audience. The true measure of our work isn't just in assets protected or recovered, but in trust restored and vulnerability repurposed as strength. Looking across faces representing diverse connections to our mission, survivors who had become advocates, professionals who had implemented our protocols, donors who had sustained our growth, research partners who had validated our methodologies, I felt profound gratitude for how completely personal crisis had transformed into collective purpose. 12 years ago, standing in shock as I discovered my husband's betrayal, I could never have imagined this gathering, I continued. Not because I lacked determination or vision, but because true transformation emerges through collective wisdom rather than individual experience alone. After the ceremony concluded, I walked through the original guest house one final time before departing for Washington. The space had been continuously redesigned to serve evolving program needs, yet deliberately maintained certain elements connecting present impact to founding purpose. In the bay window where I had first confronted Natalie, a small meditation area now provided quiet space for survivors processing difficult emotions. Near the fireplace where our first support group gathered, a wall displayed testimonials from individuals whose lives had been changed through the Foundation's work. The garden, once walked in shocked devastation, now offered healing pathways and contemplative seating areas. This transformation of physical space perfectly mirrored the emotional and institutional evolution that defined the Foundation's journey, not erasing painful origins, but integrating them within larger narrative of purpose, growth, and connection that transcended individual experience. As dusk fell across the garden, I unlocked a small decorative box kept in my office, my final ritual before officially transitioning leadership to Catherine. Inside lay objects symbolizing key moments in the Foundation's development. The key to the guest house Robert had duplicated without permission, the first brochure from our initial support group, a polished stone from our first survivor retreat, the pen used to sign the Financial Security Through Empowerment Act. I added one final item, a small crystal paperweight given to commission appointees at yesterday's White House ceremony. These objects represented not just organizational milestones, but evolution of purpose from personal reclamation to systemic transformation. Returning the box to its shelf for Catherine's safekeeping, I took one last look around the space where everything had begun. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, attempting to steal not just my property but my autonomy and identity. Instead, his betrayal had inadvertently catalyzed creation of something that had helped thousands reclaim what exploitation had threatened to take from them. There was profound justice in this outcome, not the narrow satisfaction of individual retribution, but expansive impact of transforming personal violation into collective empowerment. The Foundation's work would continue evolving long after both Robert and I were gone, its methodologies preventing exploitation and supporting recovery, regardless of individual circumstances that had catalyzed its creation. As I locked the guest house door for what might be the last time as executive director, I thought about the unexpected symmetry of life paths. Robert had died with his cognitive capacity diminished, his deceptions long exposed, his exploitative patterns interrupted. I was embarking on new challenges that would extend the Foundation's principles into national policy. Natalie was beginning supervised work preventing the very exploitation dynamics in which she had once participated. None of these outcomes could have been predicted that Tuesday afternoon 12 years ago, when I first glimpsed Robert and Natalie through the guest house window. Yet they represented perfect manifestation of the fundamental truth that had guided our work from its inception. How we respond to betrayal ultimately matters more than the betrayal itself. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, intending it as staging ground for dismantling the financial independence I had carefully built. Instead, it had become foundation for something neither of us could have imagined: a movement strengthening financial autonomy for countless individuals beyond our specific story. In this transformation lay the most profound victory, not merely reclaiming what was mine, but creating meaning that extended far beyond individual experience. The guest house that once represented betrayal now stood as testament to possibility that exists when violation becomes catalyst rather than conclusion, when personal pain transforms into collective purpose that outlasts its origins. 15 years after Robert's betrayal, I found myself standing at a podium in the East Room of the White House, watching the president sign the Comprehensive Financial Protection Act into law. The legislation represented the culmination of 3 years leading the Federal Commission, transforming the methodologies we had developed at the Morgan Foundation into national policy. As cameras flashed and officials applauded, I thought about how completely my life had diverged from the path I had once expected. This legislation wouldn't exist without Rebecca Morgan, the president acknowledged, gesturing toward me. Her work has fundamentally changed how our nation understands and addresses financial exploitation in relationships. The formal ceremony concluded with handshakes and photographs, followed by a small reception where legislators and advocates celebrated years of collaborative effort. Senator Maria Vasquez, who had championed the bill through multiple congressional sessions, embraced me warmly. "From personal crisis to national policy," she murmured. "That's a remarkable journey." Her observation captured something essential about transformation: how individual experience could catalyze systemic change when channeled through persistent, principled action. The legislation established comprehensive protections that would have prevented my own exploitation 15 years earlier, along with thousands of similar cases across the country. Later that evening, alone in my Washington apartment, I reflected on the extraordinary arc that had brought me to this moment. The acute pain of Robert's betrayal had faded almost completely, replaced by purpose and impact I could never have anticipated during those raw early days. What began as desperate fight to reclaim my own assets had evolved into movement strengthening financial autonomy for countless others. My phone chimed with a video call from Catherine, who had successfully led the Morgan Foundation through remarkable growth during my Washington tenure. Her face appeared on screen, surrounded by staff gathered for a celebration watch party. "We just witnessed history," she exclaimed as colleagues cheered in the background. "This changes everything for the cases we're handling." For the next half hour, I connected virtually with the organization that remained my heart's home despite geographical distance. Their enthusiasm represented the most meaningful validation: practitioners who understood exactly how these new protections would impact individual lives. The following morning brought a different kind of closure when I received an email from the executor of Robert's estate. The modest remaining assets, after covering his medical care, had been directed to a research fund studying financial exploitation prevention, an ironic final chapter to our story. Whether this represented genuine remorse or simply appropriate disposition by the conservatorship remained unknowable. Either way, resources that had once enabled exploitation would now help prevent it. 2 days later, I boarded a flight back to my home city, having formally concluded my commission appointment. The Foundation's board had unanimously approved my return in a new role, strategic advisor rather than executive director, allowing me to contribute expertise while continuing national advocacy work. Catherine met me at the airport, our hug conveying appreciation for seamless leadership partnership despite complex transitions. "Ready for the surprise?" she asked as we drove from the terminal. "What surprise?" I laughed, accustomed to Catherine's occasional spontaneity. She simply smiled as we turned toward downtown, eventually stopping before a stately building I didn't recognize. A discreet bronze plaque beside the entrance read, "Morgan Center for Financial Empowerment." "The board approved it last month," Catherine explained, watching my reaction. our new consolidated headquarters, bringing all services under one roof while maintaining the guest house as our historical foundation. Inside, the beautifully renovated space balanced professional elegance with welcoming accessibility. Program areas were thoughtfully designed based on 15 years of service experience, private consultation rooms, community education spaces, research facilities, and administrative offices organized to facilitate both client dignity and operational efficiency. "This is extraordinary," I murmured, taking in the physical manifestation of institutional growth and sustainability. "When did this happen?" "We've been planning for 2 years," Catherine admitted. "Wanted it ready for your return. The capital campaign was oversubscribed within 6 months. Donors recognize what we've built together." The building tour concluded in a light-filled conference room where foundation staff had gathered for my homecoming. Familiar faces mingled with newer team members, representing continuity alongside evolution. Their collective expertise and commitment ensured the organization's impact would continue regardless of any individual leader's involvement. After heartfelt reconnection with colleagues, Catherine and I visited the original guest house, now designated as historical cornerstone of the foundation's work. The space had been carefully preserved while repurposed as museum and educational center, documenting the evolution of financial exploitation awareness and prevention. Walking through rooms that had once represented personal trauma, now transformed into educational resource, I marveled at the journey's completeness. The space where I had confronted Natalie now featured interactive exhibits, helping visitors identify warning signs of exploitative relationships. The area where Robert had planned to dismantle my financial independence now housed a resource library, supporting survivors reclaiming their autonomy. "Full circle," Catherine observed quietly as we stood in the garden that had witnessed both devastating revelation and eventual transformation. "More like spiral," I corrected gently. "We keep returning to core truths, but always from higher perspective. This evolution, personal healing expanding into institutional impact, individual reclamation growing into collective empowerment, represented the journey's true meaning. Robert's betrayal had initially appeared as devastating conclusion to chapter of my life. Instead, it had become prologue to something far more significant than either of us could have imagined. The following week, I settled into my new advisory role, working primarily from home while maintaining regular connection with Foundation leadership. This arrangement provided perfect balance, contributing experience while empowering others, maintaining mission connection without constraining organizational evolution. During this transition, I received unexpected invitation from Stanford University to deliver their commencement address, focused on transforming personal challenge into systemic change. The opportunity resonated deeply, chance to share hard-won wisdom with young people establishing their life trajectories. Standing before graduates and their families on that sun-drenched California morning, I reflected on journey that had brought me to this podium, so different from path I had envisioned, while building my interior design business and marriage to Robert all those years ago. Transformation begins with how we respond to life's unexpected turns, I told the attentive audience. 15 years ago, I discovered my husband moving his mistress into our guest house as part of an elaborate scheme to steal my investment properties. That moment could have defined me through victimhood or bitterness. Instead, it became catalyst for creating something meaningful beyond personal circumstance. I shared how initial fight for personal justice had naturally expanded into advocacy for systemic change, how individual recovery had connected with collective empowerment. Not as exceptional journey, but as illustration of possibility available. Whenever we refuse to allow violation to become definition, the measure of your life won't be found in moments of challenge, I concluded, but in how you transform those experiences into purpose that extends beyond yourself. Not despite difficult chapters, but through them, creating meaning that outlasts individual circumstance. Later that evening, walking alone along the Stanford campus paths, I reflected on completeness of the circle. From devastated wife discovering betrayal to commencement speaker sharing wisdom gleaned through that very experience, not as sad cautionary tale, but as testament to possibility that exists when violation becomes catalyst rather than conclusion. My phone chimed with text from Jessica. "Saw your speech online. Remember when we sat in that coffee shop 15 years ago planning how to fight back? Look at you now." Her message prompted smile of appreciation for Journey's entirety, from immediate allies who had supported my initial response to Global Network now implementing methodologies we had pioneered. The transformation extended far beyond personal vindication or individual healing to institutional impact that would continue long after my direct involvement concluded. As dusk settled over the beautiful campus, I felt profound gratitude for unexpected path that had emerged from darkest moment. Robert had moved his mistress into our guest house, believing it marked end of everything I had built. Instead, it had become foundation for something neither of us could have imagined: movement, strengthening financial autonomy for countless individuals beyond our specific story. In this transformation lay most meaningful response to betrayal. Not merely surviving or even personally thriving, but creating legacy of protection and empowerment that would continue helping others long after our individual story faded from memory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.